largely over here, we have three questions to deal with, and we have a distinguished panelist with us who will talk about that. I had made a presentation, but since we are short of time, I will just lay out the questions and put distinct 3 points, which I will expect each one of you will talk through in say 4 or 5 minutes, so that we have enough time for Q&A and discussions. Does that work for all of you? Okay. So three questions. The first question which this session will deal is that India has made quite a leap forward in terms of a climate transition. If we think of the 51% capacity addition, but if you translate it to generation, 51% renewable energy capacity addition is almost 22 to 25% of renewable energy generation also. So even though it's a big step in terms of the capacity addition, 49% coal and 51% renewable, what systemic changes we need to make if you have to enhance that generation ratio? I did some back of the envelope calculation before coming for this workshop, and the number which was coming on my mind is that if you take a renewable energy capacity to generation ratio, right now it is at 2.3 terawatt hour per gigawatt. That in 2070 at least needs to go to 3.7. If that's the vision, what system level changes do we need to bring? So I will set the contour so it becomes easier for all of you to pinpoint. The second question that this session will deal with is that what are the financing options? What blended finance type of structures we can use? Do we use international finance, domestic finance? From where those financial support will come? How will that be moderated? What will be done? We know that the sustainability linked bonds in the last 2 years have worked pretty well. So one of you, I will request to intervene on this point. And the third point which this session will delve upon is what should be India's response to the world in terms of climate diplomacy, energy justice, these questions. So largely, these are the three major questions of the storytelling that we will do in this session. So first, I will I was thinking who to invite first. So I will invite Kailash ji, first you, and you pick up a question which you will like to delve upon.
I'm Kailash. I'll be speaking on critical minerals and its importance in energy net security. 40 years back, when I was a graduate student, I was taken to Gopalpur sea beach. I was shown a thin band of black sand, and along with the white sands and all, but the thin band was very contrasting. Thereafter, I was taken to the rare earth complex, Indian rare earth complex, and they showed me different elements from the sand, how they are segregated and how they are processed into different minerals or rare earth minerals, and then they were put into they were processed and they were put into packets, and that time they told us that it goes to Kerala. From there it goes to Atomic Energy Division. Later on they said the packets were sent to China. It goes there and it is processed there and made into final product. So now where do we send? 40 years back, this was the practice. Now also we are sending the same rare earth elements sending to China for processing. So this is 40 years we have done hardly any progress on this. Now we have to discuss how rare earth and critical minerals can change. I'll cover ways to achieve net zero target, critical minerals and its importance, India's critical mineral landscape, measures to maintain supply chain and challenges way ahead. India's goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2070 is aligning climate actions with national development priorities. And India is laying groundwork through sectoral decarbonization pathways in energy, industry, transport, and increased electrification. As of 25, we have already received 36% of emission reduction target set for 30 and now aiming to 45% reduction. Rapid expansion of solar, wind, and hydro and other renewable energy sources is to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Technologies such as solar photovoltaic modules, wind turbines, etc., require large quantities of critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, silver, and rare earth elements. Energy storage systems, particularly lithium-ion batteries, play a crucial role for ensuring grid stability. These systems rely heavily on lithium, nickel, cobalt, and manganese. Large-scale adoption of electric vehicles, grid-scale storage will significantly increase demand for these minerals, and these minerals become critical enablers of reliable clean energy systems. All this green energy infrastructure and technology are heavily mineral intensive, rely on minerals we spoke now. These minerals are also known as critical minerals. Thus, critical minerals are fundamental reducing carbon dioxide emissions. Now, critical minerals, what is critical minerals? Every time you touch a smartphone, you use indium in your phone's touchscreen and lithium battery in its battery. You stare gallium in your television screen and hear neodymium through its speakers. All modern technologies, household appliances depend on these minerals. We travel aluminum-bodied cars powered with lithium cobalt batteries. In hospitals, tantalum surgical equipments and gadolinium used in X-rays that help doctors to detect. Across the planet, yttrium is used as advanced and often terrifying weapon systems, while dysprosium and tellurium are critical for green energy technologies. Satellites filled with samariums orbit at the edge of space. Modern society, in every sense, hinges on these minerals. Some of the critical minerals, also known as rare earth elements, act as vitamins for modern industry, though required in small quantity but vital for its performance. Their unique magnetic, catalytic, and phosphorescent properties make them indispensable. Minerals essential for economic development and national security are considered as critical minerals. They play a key role in clean energy, high-tech electronics, transport, and defense. Countries define critical minerals based on their national priorities. In 30 minerals were decided as critical minerals by the government of India.
Kailasji,
Yeah.
2 minutes, and I will appreciate if you stick to the questions that I have highlighted.
Solar panel depend on silicon, tellurium, indium, and gallium sunlight to electricity. Turn sunlight into electricity. Electrical minerals drive the national's solar system dreams. Wind turbines are powered by neodymium and dysprosium. Electrical vehicles are fueled lithium and cobalt also. India adopted a multi-pronged approach in securing critical mineral supplies, ramping up exploration, setting up national critical mission, etc. India entered into strategic partnership with agreements with reduced rich countries, diversified by supply chain critical minerals, such MOUs with Australia and lithium. Stable procurement through partnership with suppliers countries like China, Australia, Russia can secure consistent supply with critical minerals, forming long-term agreement with strategic partnership and major supplier countries such as China, Australia, and Russia. This approach reduces dependence on single source of main supply chain disruptions. Rare earth elements are vital for modern industry. They are called quite modern enablers: power, permanent magnets, precision sensors, weapon systems, advanced electronics, electric vehicles, and wind turbines. We can conclude saying that critical minerals are future fossil fuel of the world. If managed strategically, these minerals can become backbone of India's long-term energy security and technological self-reliance. Therefore, India's speedy shift to green energy, we need to have access to critical minerals and its steady, reliable supply, which in turn enable India moving towards net zero emissions targets. Lastly, there is a saying, Earth has everything to meet, but everyone's need cannot be to meet everyone's need, but not the greed. Choice is in our humanity to choose to reduce pressure on Earth, even on critical minerals. Thank you.
Thank you, Kailash ji, Executive Director from the Energy Forum, New Delhi, for giving more of a supply side perspective towards a system transformation. May I request Ganesh Dilip, Chief of Staff, Center for Energy, Environment and Water. So you stick to those three questions and give a more macro picture, which you were saying.
I'm going to take questions 1 and 2, and I'll give 2 provocations today and an overall strategy. A little sick, so bear with me. So firstly, the energy transition is really not about the energy system. It's partly there, but the energy system is highly complex in its interconnection with your land systems, water systems, and all of them exist in a very complex nexus. So any transition that will happen in one system will have trade-offs and resource competitions across these other systems. Now, why is that complexity important to understand? Because now, with everything that we talked about in the first half of the summit, that is getting complicated by all of the new technology disruptions, whether that's AI or geopolitical instability, trade volatility, and things like that. On top of these complications, then we have climate change coming in as a compounding factor. You've got non-linear climate risks that are going to make the energy transition costly, but at the same time also demand it to be resilient. Now, let me zoom into the India energy transition story. When you're talking about India's energy transition, you're not talking about one transition, you're talking about 5 simultaneous transitions. There's a transition from no access to energy to modern sources of energy, whether that's electricity or clean cooking fuels. There's a transition from rural to urban. As we urbanize, there's more energy demand, but there's also new patterns of energy demand. There's a transition from growth to sustainable growth. In India, we cannot decarbonize at the cost of deindustrialization. So both of those have to go hand in hand. Then there is the transformation of India having limited bargaining power when it comes to global energy markets to now becoming much more interconnected to global energy markets because of the size of demand that's coming from India. And finally, energy markets itself are going from being highly centralized to highly fragmented to being a lot more decentralized and a lot more interconnected, riding on the digital infrastructure development. So what can India do, right? What's the strategy here? CW's research shows that we need to do 3 things on priority. 1, we need to build grids of the future. Electricity grids need to be modernized with 2x renewables coming in. Grid flexibility demand will go up 5 times in the next 5 years. We need to also build the human capital in the grid. There's a lot of decentralized assets, like whether it's solar panels to your EV chargers that are going to come onto the grid. Grid operators need to know how to handle that. And on a regional level, in South Asia, we need to really leverage the complementary capacities that South Asian countries have in solar, hydro, wind, and create a regionally interconnected grid. 2, we need to leverage green comparative advantage that our countries have to be able to diversify clean tech manufacturing supply chains. What I mean by that, we've got different capabilities in terms of manufacturing. We need to sit down with partner countries and try to really champion that India +1 model by mapping complementarities in manufacturing capabilities, by harmonizing standards, and by technology co-development. Finally, people are at the center of the energy transition. You need to build an energy transition that's focused on livelihoods, right? Of course, skilling and everything, but at the same time, there's a $50 billion opportunity for distributed renewable energy-based rural livelihoods. A solar panel on your roof that's not just powering fans and fridges, but your actual livelihoods, right? The energy transition can be so much more if we bank on that. Similarly, we need to also expand what we're talking about when you talk about the green economy, right? It's not just jobs in renewable energy. It's going to be a lot of allied things, the circular economy, bioeconomy, nature-based solutions. There's going to be a lot of jobs that will need to be created here. Finally, and I'll take 1 minute for this, I mean, it'll be remiss for me as chief of staff to come to a forum like a think tank forum to talk only about issue strategies. For me, the institution is as much a part of the story. So what is the institutional strategy here? What can think tanks really do? I think we need to build many, many, many Manhattan projects. What do I mean by that? You know, in the US, they spent, in today's money, $38 billion to put together one Manhattan project that gave it an atom bomb. So far, we have spent $1.6 trillion on AI. For India alone, to reach net zero by 2070, you will need $10.1 trillion of investments between 2020 and 2070. That's many, 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 many Machiavellian crazy Manhattan projects that you need to do. And what do I mean by Manhattan projects? Not just institutions. I'm not saying we need more think tanks. We do need that. But at the same time, we need several partnerships. We need think tanks to innovatively partnership with various different actors, create several kinds of coalitions prevailing, right? Partner with artists, students, architects, all kinds of people. Because when you bring communities of innovation, communities of theory, and communities of practice together, that's where innovation happens. And this is not a new idea. This is what won the Nobel Prize for Economics last year, right? When you bring together communities of theory and innovation, researchers, and communities of practice together, that's what has fueled innovation. And that's what will help us understand this complex, complicated, compounding, simultaneous energy transitions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ganesh. You mentioned about last year's Nobel Prize. So it reminded me about so he brought in a choice architecture problem, and Thaler got it for one of the work. But if you go to choice architecture, we call something called decoding and decoy effect. So maybe one session can be thought on how decoying can also happen in energy transition. Thank you so much. So I will turn to Pooja Mitra, Partnerships and Policy Lead, Dakshin Foundation, Karnataka. Pooja, if you can highlight a little bit on the blended financing structure and India's response in terms of climate diplomacy, if you want to, or otherwise out of those three, whatever you want to.
So thank you so much to ORF and to Nalanda University for having us here. I'm going to answer this question from, let's say, a maritime perspective, because as Dakshin, we work across the coastal parts of India and the island ecosystem, so our experience is grounded in that. And I'd like to look at all three questions, but from a lens of, really there are aspects of economic competitiveness. How do you maintain that? How do we attract better finance models? What are we missing in India in terms of focus? And I think I'd like to look at it through four aspects, which, we need to interconnect. One is ocean resource security. You are the largest maritime nation sitting in the Indian Ocean, which is the fastest warming ocean since the 1950s. The latest, the 2021 IPCC 6th assessment report also continues to confirm that. And yet it's not a big factor, even though we are so dependent on the Indian Ocean across all economies of India. And I would not like to silo them into blue and this, and because it's all sort of linked. I think we really need to look at four aspects. Number one, what are we doing to protect ocean resource productivity? How are we securing that and keeping these ecosystems viable so they can actually meet the demand that we are putting on them? Second, we know that there is already significant impact on labor productivity, especially also in the maritime space. So how are we securing labor productivity from climate impacts? Because that's going to have an impact on your economic competitiveness, on your industry growth, on the targets you want to meet, on the finance you want to apply. So that would be a second aspect that I think is really needs to be given real center stage in the kind of perspectives that we're building around these things. Thirdly, it's also important to see the ocean as a place of solutions, where we need to go beyond targets or go beyond extraction, but also look at what kind of solutions does it offer us. So are we increasing investment into assessing our upcoming blue carbon sequestration? Or are we remaining focused on terrestrial in India, given our large coastline? Do we have models for how carbon finance is going to work in that maritime space? Are we putting attention to that? What is that going to mean for communities who are dependent? And how is that going to finance the transitions that will affect them as well? And the sort of the fourth aspect of this is really looking at How are we funding these kind of solutions, not just from the lens of energy transition, or we're looking at, how we're using these resources? How is India going to be that leader globally? The question is, we are sitting in a position where we can lead on these maritime solutions, where we can demonstrate, because your credibility to influence globally depends on your demonstrated ability domestically. And if you aren't looking at it interconnectedly, when you have all these resources, these ecosystems, these communities, these layered problems, then you're not really, where you're going to influence. What is it that you want to see happen? So I think really moving away from that target perspective only and really looking at what does that mean in terms of action? How are you going to ensure benefits are equitable? I think in previous panels, we've mentioned the words access, inclusion, equity. What does that look like? When you're saying we need to transition and we are thinking of putting offshore, we want to, test out thermals, we want to do all these different technology rich solutions, but they are grounded in real ecosystems. They're grounded with real people need to work on them and use them. So I think really looking at that systemic level change, and Dakshin has, preparing a blue carbon atlas, for example, for Andamans, which could be a useful tool to start to actually account for these things, because it's supposed to influence the way we are financing these ecosystems. And I would just like to end with also saying that since we are a forum which is bringing together thinkers, we are looking at different types of funding that comes into India and for what are we prioritizing. If you just, Dakshin has a report which we have done with Ashoka University called Philanthropy for the Oceans, and you can, read it up when you have the time. But resource conservation, which is the premise of your entire economic growth, your credibility, your leadership, gets 7% of domestic philanthropic funding. In that, marine and coastal gets a fraction of it, even though 40% of global population depends on maritime resources. There are 500 million linked livelihood, direct livelihoods that are affected by it. But we don't see that push in India for ocean philanthropy. And how are we going to do that? How are we going to build those narratives, build those networks and coalitions? And I think India, we talked about BRICS presidency earlier. We are now the IORA presidency for the next 2 years. There's the Bay of Bengal program. We have historical maritime leadership, cooperative leadership in the global south. So how are we going to leverage that? And I really think that we are sitting on an exciting time where the problems are, multifold, but so are the solutions. And I think if we really bring that together and not ignore the largest ecosystem on the planet, which drives us, and really sort of center that, I think in the next decade, we can really see a lot of tectonic shifts that can happen. The expertise is there in India, whether it's in government, whether it's in private agencies, whether it's in the non-civil society space. Let's find ways to bring people together, bring knowledge into informing policy and action, and really making this a much more inclusive and a regularly interactive space to kind of put these things into place. So yeah, that would be my take on it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pooja. I really like the way you got in the entire discourse, ecology and ethics. And you reminded me of Madhav Gadgil's preliminary and seminal work, the book Ecology and Ethics. He passed away, so I just thought his name should be mentioned. The Western Ghats Ecological Panel also had mentioned very similar issues in 2010, which you just right now highlighted. One chapter had a reference on how we should not compromise on our biodiversity and ecological transition while we move on to the...
I could just add to that, loss of biodiversity is directly going to impact your climate security, your economic competitiveness, your ability to keep people employed, keep them safe, keep well-being of communities front and center. Today, we've been talking so much about those aspects. And I think that's really the power of going beyond targets or really looking at all of this in an interconnected lens. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to bring that point out.
Thank you so much. I think we are doing very good on time, and I'm a little less restless. So, okay, with that note, Kishore, to you, you know the questions. You have generally heard the conversation. What is your take? Whatever you will like to talk about.
We're talking about net zero 2070. I'm not sure whether I see 2070 or not. And most of the, the back people who are sitting, maybe they sit in the front in the 2070 and they will maybe discuss about another target if we don't follow certain kind of regulations. So Professor Goswami has already mentioned that You said, if I'm not wrong, it's a three terawatts. Like, is it how much you said? Like,
So if you do the latest IEA and India's coal, all the metadata, and the renewable energy data, so the terawatt are divided by gigawatt. So capacity to generation is around 2.38. It needs to go to somewhere around 3.45. So almost 50% less than capacity.
Okay, great. So the good news is that India is already well ahead about our target, the 2030 target, which is 50% of non-fossils installed capacity, and also several other initiatives like a particularly rooftop installation. There's a Prime Minister's PM Surya Ghar, which is actually doubled, and also we have there's a good push for the domestic PV modules manufacturing, which is also increased. But the problem is the capacity addition alone does not guarantee the emission cuts, which we are talking about net zero emissions and that. We need to address. So I teach circular economy. So I look into the circular economy lens. Is that so we also need to address the integrate with this net zero concept. So how do you take care of the emissions here? So one thing is like we talk about the life cycle of emissions. So maybe the solar and the wind, they produce no emissions, but the production of the solar and wind, and then also the end of life. One example is that I've seen in the Spain. I was in Spain before I was coming here. It's like I was here. In the Spain, Spain is one of the countries that produce the solar panels, but the one of the business proposal I've received that whether they can take all the broken panels of the solar. So the one thing is how do you take care of the waste material? So, and another one is also we talk about the resource dependence, and then we keep on manufacturing the adding more and more, and then we required more minerals, and then and more as in my previous speaker is also has mentioned about the cobalt, lithium, and so these are the metals has increased, demand increases on that. So in economics we say that if we continue like that resource utilization, and then in next 30 years, 40 years, maybe we need another planet. So that's what we say. So, and then that's where, so so now we're talking about the circular economy, because in the linear economy, just we produce, consume, and dispose. And but when we bring it the circularity, what are the things, aspects we can think about that? So one thing is the designing of the goods. The solar panels, which I said mentioned about the Spain, they couldn't able to recover, refurbish. So they want to send it to a country where a kind of a waste to other country. So, but if you have if the panels are much better designed, they can be the materials can be extracted at the end of the life. And also one in these that extending the asset life, which is instead of producing the low quality panels or low quality in the wind turbines, extend the quality of life that. So a high quality of the materials, which actually is also reduce the pressure on the minerals, which was mentioning in that. So several frameworks are actually we already have a policy frameworks for the circular economy. Particularly for we call the extended producer responsibility, which is the producer has a responsibility to whatever he's manufacturing, so whatever is the end life, so he has to collect and back. So that is actually happening with the batteries, and then it's happening with so other electronic gadgets. But as a particular for the solar and the renewable energies, so technologies we don't have, so that should be so the framework should be there. And then we also should work on the reverse logistics, where and the reuse or repair systems and that. So a few years back, I think it still is working in urban areas. So any high-rise building, so they have to use it solar panel, power the lifts. But most of the solar panels are not able to repair it, or if once it's defunct, and then they have to dump it in the garbage, and that is creates more of the pollution in that. Okay, so now we're talking about that's what about circular economy, but now talking about the finances, which we are mentioning about the point is that. So the gap is like, clean energy financing gap is huge now. So it's almost like a $2 trillion is required in that. So what actually happens here is that, like, what kind of initiatives we can think about, like, connecting the circular economy and then net zero concept. So one I already mentioned about extended producer responsibility. The producer should give an incentive to, like, provide, like, produce a high quality product so that, like, it's extend its life. And then also these products is also can be digital or audited for the future recycling revenues that can be become that, like, recovered from collateral debt. And also providing the production link, the incentives, which is also helps the circular loop. The one's waste is actually as a wealth of another company. So these kinds of, like, incentives can be created, and then finances also, like, the bank or any multi-development banks, actually they provide the loans based on the end value life also. So if it has a value after again, if it's coming back to the economy, then they will be they create finances also. So as you're, like, the third point is just like you mentioned about that, like, how India and then other countries, multilateral countries, like, set up in that. So India is actually can play a big role also, because India is also started, like, resource efficiency, and then our mission life is also talks about, and the circular economy. These are the, like, core principles we can develop, and then also in the previous speaker is actually was mentioning, like, collaborating with other countries, and that. For example, like, if you can, like, the collaborating with the EU is already, like, their net zero target is 2050, and then, like, there are a lot of advancing technologies are, like, so it's not about one country, and, like, so it's a problem, global problem. So like, collaborating with the EU in advanced recycling techniques, that will actually helps. And then, of course, India is actually focusing more on EV vehicles. So we also have to take care of that, like, how to, like, the end life of the batteries, and that's maybe Japan and Korea can like, we can collaborate with that. And then also
Kishore, 60 seconds. 60 seconds.
Yeah. So we can this, like, the South Asian regional, like, so we can actually material loop. So how we can utilize the material which is used for the this solar panels, and then wind energy. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for such an active participation, and all the panelists for your wonderful interventions, and ORF and Nalanda University for organizing this.